On average, you'll have to wait 31 days to see an OBGYN. And if you're dealing with an infection or outbreak, you know you need care fast. That's where WISP comes in. Connect with a U.S. licensed provider online and pick up safe, effective treatment at your local pharmacy that same day. Plus, get birth control and more delivered in all 50 states. Take control with comprehensive sexual and reproductive care, all from your phone. WISP. That's hellowisp.com. The waiting room can wait.
A Mochi moment from Sadie, who writes, I'm not crying, you're crying. This is what I said during my first appointment with my physician at Mochi, because I didn't have to convince him I needed a GLP-1. He understood, and I felt supported, not judged. I came for the weight loss and stayed for the empathy. Thanks, Sadie. I'm Myra Ahmed, founder of Mochi Health. To find your Mochi moment, visit joinmochi.com.
Sadie is a Mochi member compensated for her story.
Not going to work now. Okay.
Huh? Is it working?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's been working today, so all right.
So we're back with Ken and Mike on My Uncle's Escaped Alcatraz, and I know a lot of people have been commenting on the boards and stuff like that, like asking information about the postcard and about Brazil. All I can say to you guys, it's all coming, and it's not all coming like Art said something was all coming. And he said something's like the other shoe's going to drop. There's a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes that, when we confirm all this stuff, and like I said, we may have an announcement for you in a few weeks, but please be patient with us. We've been these guys have been working on this thing forever. We've been working on it for like almost a year and a half now. And, but everything's coming to fruition, and we are hopefully having a lot of answers for you soon, and what we're going to be doing about this case. So hang on. That's all I can say.
Well, I'll just jump in and say, when Ken and I did Expedition Unknown, the Alcatraz episode several years ago, the show had been on for many, many years. He does multiple episodes each season. So it's just a 1 hour, for each episode. So it's, they're looking for new things to talk about. And even for an Alcatraz story where we gave a lot of similar things that we've talked about, obviously not in as much detail, but what we talked about on the podcast. And it took a number of months just to get that greenlit for one episode for 1 hour on a show that had been on for years. So that was a lot, and it almost didn't happen. We got down to the wire when they finally said, yeah, we're going to do it. So for something, what we're trying to do, we're trying to create whole new material and new outlets for telling the story. That is a much bigger endeavor with a lot of more people involved, a lot more money, and a lot more resources needed to make this happen. They're very careful before they say yes. They dot their I's, cross their T's, and it's many are called, few are chosen.
Exactly.
All right. So what's going on this week? What are we doing?
I know you guys, we were talking earlier, wanted to kind of dive into Fred Breezy and also
Frank Morris.
Yeah.
Well, I've had a lot of people ask me about Frank Morris. And our book really kind of centers on John and Clarence.
Mm-hmm.
But, there is really, truly another guy who was involved in this escape, which is Frank Morris. And we don't really kind of cover too much about him, other than he was, part of the escape. And we don't really know a lot about what happened to him. But, a lot of people ask about him, which kind of made me think, well, maybe we need to go back and really kind of explore some of the details and some of the information that we know about Frank. And, I figured why not take this opportunity and talk about what, one, Fred Breezy said about him, things that we know that is true about him that we've been able to uncover, and just kind of maybe explore some of the avenues that we think might have happened to Frank.
Yeah, no, it's interesting because we did talk a little bit about his background, him as a young man, and and then his lead up to Alcatraz. But the aftermath, yeah, we really haven't really kind of delved too much into it. And part of that is intentional, like for you guys in the book too, because I feel like you felt like he got too much attention, and your uncles didn't get hardly any attention, i.e. the Clint Eastwood movie, and a lot of the law enforcement who were looking into this case, they were all saying that he was the mastermind of the crime. So I know that was partially intentional by your point. But yeah, as far as what happened to him after the escape and, where he ended up going, and we speculate, I mean, we have a lot of leads about your uncles in Brazil, but, what do we have about Frank?
Well, the only thing that we really truly kind of have is that I started kind of thinking about, okay, so when he's in prison, he has no family members that we know of. And so I really kind of started thinking about, gosh, what kind of a person is sitting in prison that doesn't have any family members? No one's writing to him, at least that we know of. And so he's pretty much kind of a loner. How he grew up, he grew up as an orphan. He grew up dropping out of school, just like John and Clarence, very early, pretty much going into crime at a very young age. The only thing that we really kind of know about him from his past is, he had a mom who really didn't kind of have a whole lot of interaction with him. And so you really kind of think about when he's in Alcatraz, when they finally went to Alcatraz, John and Clarence came from a very large family. And so they were constantly getting letters, from when John was in Lewisburg, when he eventually went to Leavenworth. Him and Clarence both got letters from family members and girlfriends, whoever was writing to them. They get to Alcatraz, they've got all these letters that are coming into them, letters that they had written, to their family and other, whoever they decided to write to. But Frank is not that case. And maybe that's the reason why in the files, when they describe eventually the items that are in the pouch, they eventually come back and say that every item was related to the England brothers and nothing to Frank Morris, which kind of makes sense, right? Because if you don't have any family members, no one's really kind of writing to you. So if they were truly going to take all this information with them, there's nothing that Frank has that he's going to take with him because he doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
So, it's kind of a sad story to me because you're sitting in prison and you have no connection to the outside whatsoever.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, what we do know too is from the information that we've been able to uncover, none of the family members of John and Clarence ever visited them in Alcatraz. And as far as we know, nobody ever visited Frank Morris in Alcatraz. So none of them ever had visitors, which kind of goes back into the story that we've heard. And I've actually watched the video of the individual who claims that he is related to Frank Morris and that he had helped him by supplying money to a guard who was going to, facilitate them, helping them get out. I mean, he pretty much kind of comes in and says, I helped by supplying and paying off a guard. And so, but that really kind of doesn't make sense to me. Because if you really stop and kind of think about, okay, if you go down that rabbit hole and you say, well, okay, let's assume that this guy is telling the truth about Frank Morris and that, he paid off a guard. Well, first of all, how would you know what guard you're talking about? I mean, the only way that you could actually find a guard that was going to be willing to, take money from, to help cover this escape is that you would have to at least know a guard that was on the cell house block, right? I mean, like you wouldn't pay a guard who was watching the kitchen, because he wouldn't be able to like not say anything about walking by a cell and seeing someone who wasn't supposedly there. So they would have to pick out a specific guard that was going to be able to be paid off. And once they found that guard, Frank Morris, if this is an individual who is related to Frank Morris, he would somehow be able to relay that information to this individual.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say.
This guy, when he gave this testimony and said that he was related to Frank Morris, he never produced any letter that Frank Morris ever wrote to him.
And then when was that?
That was in, probably the 2000s, like middle 2000s.
And who was this? Who was this guy, and where was he from?
Well, believe it or not, he was actually from Atlanta, Georgia. He was from the Georgia area where I grew up from. And I never met the guy, but you can go out and if you Google search this individual, I mean, you'll find him. And there's a YouTube video where he's given an interview and he's talking about how that he helped the trio escape by paying off a guard. And, he said he actually went out there and paid the guard, and the guard, was supposedly going to overlook their attempts at making an escape. But when I started kind of really thinking about this story, you had to really kind of think about, okay, he had to at least know the guard that you're talking about. Frank and him at least had to have some type of a conversation through some type of letter. And this letter also would have to have gone back to Frank Morris. So let's just say that, this is true and that Frank Morris somehow contacted this individual who's supposedly related to him and said, hey, I found guard such and such that is willing to take a payoff by helping us, by not seeing or looking at what we're doing. And so this individual who said he is related to Frank Morris and is, participated in this, would have at least had to have traveled out to Alcatraz to pay this guard. And then you kind of think about, oh my gosh, this letter, if he had written Frank Morris and said, hey, I'm going to help you in this matter, I'm going to pay this guard off. Well, then if Frank Morris had left that letter behind, would not that letter have been investigated by the FBI and they could have actually identified who helped them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless he did it very kind of stealthily and mentioned the guard's name in some sort of other context. But, that's reaching. I mean, my question to you, to both of you, is like, how many guards actually lived on Alcatraz? Did they all just commute back and forth on the ferry, or were there a portion of them that lived on the island? Because I know they had, we knew that some people lived on that island.
Some did. I'm not sure of the number who actually lived there. I don't believe that every guard lived there. I mean, they could travel back and forth. But again, if you were going to pick a guard, if you were a prisoner, Frank Morris, okay, since this is around Frank Morris, if you were going to pick a guard to trust, to go up to them and say, hey, we're going to plan an escape and we need your help and we're going to pay you for it. One, that's a very big risk. Because one, you don't know whether or not this guard is going to believe you or not. And two, this guard who is going to accept money from you has got to believe that, one, you're going to be faithful enough if you get caught not to turn them in. Because that's a big risk. I mean, you think about this guard who is, I don't care how much money you're going to offer him. If they had gotten caught, what's the chances that they would have turned the guard in?
Of course.
Yes, exactly. I mean, especially if you could get your sentence reduced. So that guard would have taken a great risk to himself and his family if he had participated in this.
And how much money could he really have given him?
From what this individual said on this YouTube video, and I never met the guy, I believe it was like $300. Now,
$300?
62 was a lot of money.
But still, not
But
enough
still,
to spend your life in. If you get caught, you're going to go to Alcatraz. You're going to be in the prison,
I mean,
not guarding it.
Can you imagine that you're a guard and you say, I'm not getting paid that much. I'm going to help this guy. But then you take a very big risk because what if this guy is caught? What if the trio doesn't make it and they get caught? Or what if there's something left behind that ties me to the escape? Which undoubtedly it wasn't, because no guard was actually charged except the guy named
Herman the German,
which they didn't really kind of tie him to helping them in any way. They just charged him or fined him because he didn't do his check like he was supposed to have done that night.
Yeah, I mean, Mike, I believe, Mike, didn't you tell me that he was suspended for like a month or something like that?
20 days for dereliction of duty, because he signed off that he had done the check, but he didn't have enough time. So yeah, I think it was just before midnight when he was going off shift. He was supposed to check him first.
But he actually said in his recorded interview that he actually did do it. Didn't he? When we looked at it, record.
Yeah. He actually.
No, he felt like they were framing him for it, blaming him for it.
He said he completed the check that night, but he actually didn't. And oh my gosh, how many times have you been on a job and you say, this is a mundane type kind of check. I'm gonna walk this hall. I know everybody's in their cell because everybody's been locked down. We did a check at 9:00. Everybody was there. No cell has been opened. And I can kind of understand. You go, I just check it off and I went down there. But, no door has been opened. No one was expecting anyone to escape that night.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the likelihood, most of the time when there are prison breaks like that, they usually do have help from the inside. So it's not unlikely that couldn't have happened. I just think it's very unlikely on Alcatraz because you had to be on, if he had no visitors and he's not communicating with this person via letter to find out and because they monitor all their communications, and unless they did it in some sort of secret code, I just find it highly suspect that this person paid $300 to bribe a guard to get out of one of the most notorious federal penitentiaries in the world.
Well, they had inside help, but it was from Mickey Cohen.
Exactly. Exactly.
So they actually did have help, but like you said, so let's assume that Frank Morris decides, I'm gonna write this guy in Georgia who is his supposedly uncle or some relation to him. So he would have had to written him a letter, which you would have thought when he was giving this interview, he would have produced this letter that came from Frank Morris, but he never did. And then at some point in time, this individual would have had it written back to Frank Morris, to say, hey, okay, I'm going to go meet this guard, and who is this guy's name? I mean, you just don't go out to San Francisco and go up to somebody and go, hey, are you the guard that I'm supposed to be paying off? Like that's ridiculous. I mean, somehow he had to have relayed that information. If it's true, and we all know that every mail coming in and out of Alcatraz was censored.
Yeah.
So any guard's name would have been picked up. I don't care how much code you might have used. You're not going to write a code to describe a guard that you don't know, that you're somehow supposed to go meet, and pay off that's going to, and there and again, it had to be a guard that was on the floor, right? So I mean, you can't pay a guard off who is, say, in the lunchroom that has no interaction with the prisoners, because what good is he going to do?
Right. Doesn't make any sense.
You had to have a guard that was going to be walking the floor that would pretend not to look at the cell that they were doing the work in. So there was only a handful of guards that would have been doing this. So, and if that's the case, then the FBI would have definitely honed in on these two, or whoever it was.
Mike, what were you going to say?
Well, after, when Whitey Bulger even talks about this in his letters, that after the escape, of course, the prison was shut down. The FBI shows up right away. After, during the vigorous search for them, they're also interviewing every single inmate on the island. It took several days to get through them all. Well, they're also interviewing all the guards. Mm-hmm. And as you said, oftentimes they have inside help, not inmate related. It's guard related. Whitey talks about in his letter when he was in Atlanta that a guard had provided some saw blades to try to help him with the escape, and he never gave the name up, and that's why he was sent to Alcatraz. So there was a guard that was involved. And then there was that story from a couple of years ago, the woman who had the romantic relationship with
Danny Mora prison.
Yeah, and so she helped that. So the information gets out. We know about this because people talk. And so if the FBI was suspecting that a guard may have been involved, because they probably thought there was no way that these guys could have not gotten out without help from one of the guards, or at least one of the guards. So they were independently, they were interrogating them one at a time. And in the end, like Ken said, the only person that was blamed for the escape was Charles Herman, because he didn't do his night check. That was what he got busted for. It had nothing else to do with aiding and abetting. That was at the very end of this entire investigation. It was, if you had checked them at 11:15 or 11:45 when you were supposed to, we might have caught them. We might have prevented the escape from happening. That was the best they could come up with after all of their discussions with the guards.
Yeah.
Well, and two, if this individual had written Frank and had said anything that was, could have been tied to him, you would have thought Frank would have taken that letter with him the night that they escaped. Just like supposedly Frank and John and Clarence took all of their letters. But he didn't. And in fact, when they eventually do the inventory of the pouch, every piece of item that was in there is related to John and Clarence. Nothing was ever tied to Frank Morris.
I do have to correct you on this point.
Okay.
Before we went on air, I was kind of skimming through the FBI report to see what it was talking about for Frank Morris, what they had to say, because there's so much information, it's hard to keep track of everything, and you forget little details. And one of the things it says in one of the pages of the report, it's talking about the waterproof bag they found in the water. It says the boats have recovered from the water what has been described as a waterproof bag containing several letters, some of which mention the names of Angland and Morris. So somehow there was some kind of a Morris connection to the bag. It doesn't say specifically what it is, but there is a reference to him in one of the letters.
But then later on, there is an FBI report too, of which I read that. And at first I thought, okay, there is definitely something with Frank Morris. And maybe that was originally saying, okay, it's tied to the three that escaped. But later on in one of the volumes, when they go into detail of the items that are in there, they said that the items were all related to John and Clarence Angland. So I don't know if maybe they, just like somehow sometimes they say things and they say, okay, this is related to the three who escaped. But then as they went through it, they actually came back and said that all of the information, for instance, all of the photos were of family members of John and Clarence. and which makes sense, right? Because John and Clarence had family members who wrote to them. Frank Morris didn't have any family members. So
well, it could have been as simple as something in a letter that they wrote
information-
to family and just mentioning him. Oh
Right.
yeah, Frank is our buddy in prison. We hang out together. It could have
Exactly.
been something
So,
like that, but
it
his
could have
name
been
was
something like
referenced
that.
in one of the letters. That's as specific as
Right.
it gets.
But from later on, because when I read the original first in volume 1, they do say that it was information tied to the England brothers and Frank Morris. But then later on, as I read, there was another document where they actually went through the detailed piece of what was in the pouch, and they said that everything was tied to John and Clarence England. Which and I started thinking, I was like, okay, well that kind of makes sense, right? Because Frank, unless he had some family member, the only person writing to him would probably have been another prisoner in another prison, because his mom, I doubt his mom ever wrote to him.
Well,
He didn't know who his dad was.
I just want to mention another thing that's also in the FBI report, going back into the background of Frank Morris. So in 1945, he was 19 years old, because he was born in 26. He was incarcerated at the time. And it says that he said at the time when he was incarcerated that he only had one living relative, and it was an aunt. He said when he was 11 years old, by the time he was 11, that both of his parents were dead. His mother and his father were no longer living, and that he had an aunt when he was 19. That was, he doesn't say if it's the father or the mother, if she was the sister of. And so the FBI tried to find this person for some reason, that they needed to talk to her, and they could never find her. She was unaccounted for. And so is this a real person, or she just didn't want to be found, or they just didn't know where she was, and she, escaped attention. But Morris was essentially saying that he knew of at the time, there was just one person alive that was connected to him, and that was it.
Right. And if they were never able to find her, she never wrote to him, which means he pretty much, the only correspondence he might have had from the outside would have been from somebody that he might have spent time with in another prison. So for him to have any information, any letter, any photo that was included in this pouch is probably very doubtful.
Is this the guy that I'm sorry, I just want to ask this one quick question. Sure. The gentleman who said he got the letter and he was the one who organized it, is he still alive, or has he since passed on?
No, he's actually dead now. But there is a video on YouTube of him talking about this, what he did and how he supplied information to the guard and how he paid him off. And supposedly he even says he went out to San Francisco and met with the guard and he paid the guard. I remember talking to Art about this. They investigated the guy. They said they didn't believe anything about it. Nothing that he said really kind of made sense. Frank Morris never had any visitors to ever come to Alcatraz, neither did John and Clarence. So for him to say, oh yeah, we paid off a guard, it's just, none of it kind of made sense. But he was someone who came forward and said that he knew Frank Morris. He was related to him. He had contact with him, and he helped set up the escape. But then that kind of goes back into the only way they could have had contact was they had to write each other.
Yeah.
They couldn't call each other on the phone, right? And no one visited Frank. So the only correspondence they could have had was writing a letter. And none of that actually ever happened.
Yeah. The other way he could have communicated it to the guard in question. And then that guard, when he was in San Francisco, could have reached out and contacted him that way.
He could have, but think about the risk. So you think about you're sitting in Alcatraz and you're thinking about escaping, and what are you going to do? Go up to a guard and say, "Hey, would you be interested in me paying you off?" I mean, that's a big risk.
It is a big risk, but it's been done before. I mean, guards get compromised all the time.
Yeah, what if the guard says, "Sure, yeah, you can pay me," and then turns him in?
Yeah.
I mean, how do you know that this guard is that type of a person that's going to take a payoff?
But and also, if that happened, I think they would have found out after the fact. They would have. Somebody would have said something that this guy was getting paid off. Somebody would have squealed on him. I don't think he would have gotten away with that.
What would have stopped this guard from taking the money and then turning them in and them getting caught? Nothing. Yep. You know, and the guard could have never mentioned the money. But then the guard takes a very big risk because, like I said, what happens if the escape gets caught by another guard? And then the three men now are going to be investigated. And how do you know they're not going to turn you in?
Yeah.
So none of it makes sense to me.
But even more so, I mean, I think if it was a guard, they would have found out. Somebody would have said something.
I totally agree.
Yeah.
Someone would have said something. You know, Frank Morris, if he had communicated this guard's name through any type of a letter to his supposedly uncle, you know, it would have been picked up by the people who censored the mail going in and out, and the FBI would have had access to any mail that Frank Morris had in his possession in his cell, and they could have easily found out who this guard's name was. And none of that happened. So, you know, Frank Morris got out with John and Clarence. The only information that we truly know about Frank Morris was that we know from this individual who was in Brazil, who said that 3 American men showed up at this town around this time frame. So we still don't know, even from this individual, was this John, Clarence, and Frank Morris. All we know is 3 American men.
But could have that third American man been Fred Breezy?
It could have been, but we don't know. All we know is 3 men. Now, the only other piece of evidence that we have about Frank Morris comes from Fred Breezy. Okay, so Fred Breezy says that when he was meeting with the Anglin family in 1992, and this is on recording, one of my aunts asked him about, they never said Frank Morris. All they said was, what about the third man? Which I'm assuming they're saying everyone knew there were 3 men who escaped.
Mm-hmm.
And so they asked about the third man. And Fred Breezy said there was another American man with them. And he said, I was never introduced to him, whether or not that's true or not. And so he also said that there was a woman with the individual. And he describes this woman as being very blonde. In fact, I think he even says how blonde, she was very, very blonde. And that he almost kind of gave the indication in his interview or his meeting with the Anglin family that he felt like she was actually kind of in charge. Like she was, I don't know if maybe in charge, meaning that she was married to this other individual, or she was like one of the persons that was kind of like controlling stuff. All I know is he indicated there was a blonde.
No, he froze.
Well, I'll just jump in here. What I was going to say before was that when going back to the FBI report about Morris, because Ken was making the point about not having family, not having communication with anybody from the outside world. That is corroborated by the FBI report. And even Whitey Bulger talks about, because he knew Morris, they were friends. They knew each other in Atlanta, and then they both came to Alcatraz. So it was a friendship that went back a ways. And they all say the same thing, that he was a loner. He was very quiet, kept to himself, didn't really mix with the other inmates much. So it sort of builds the profile that he was not a social person. I think he signed on for the escape out of practicality of he wanted to get out because Whitey Bulger talked about how he was afraid to go back to Louisiana because they had threatened to kill him when he came back because he had escaped from there and they were going to put things right when he returned. And Whitey Bulger talked about, what is it? The something dogs where they sort of let you escape and then they'd shoot you.
Was that Angola he was in?
Yeah.
He was in Angola.
In Angola.
That's a nasty place.
Dog soldiers is what he called them.
Yeah. And so I think he recognized that John and Clarence and Alan West had a good plan going, because as again Whitey's letter talk about that he's brought on board after it's already in effect, because he could work with Alan West because they were cellmates, or not cellmates, but they their cells were right next to each other, and you needed somebody to to look out and keep an eye on things so you didn't get caught. So I think that's how it was for Morris, because it wasn't so much of friendship, because the brothers didn't know him before. He was introduced through Whitey Bulger. And I don't remember if Alan West knew him or not before.
Well, actually, let me correct you on that.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to correct you on something. We don't know. I mean, Frank Morris was in Rayford Prison at about the same time that John and Clarence and Alfred was in Rayford, in Florida prison. So he was actually in prison with them in Florida at one time. Now, whether or not he knew them, I don't know, but he was in the same prison at one time with them.
Yeah.
So anyway, it wasn't, I don't think it was because of deep friendship. I think it was just more of like, hey, we all have skills. We all have a desire to get out. Let's just work together. And then he was with them for a time after the escape, because we know at least until the mid 1970s that they were still together. So it was about 13 or so years later, and then he just disappears. We there's just nothing there. In the again in the FBI report, there was a sighting of him in Brazil when was it? In 1964. So this was 2 years after the escape. There was and there were other sightings in other places. There was one in New Orleans or there was one in Portland in 62 in June, several days after the escape, and another one in New Orleans in 1967, and then in Brazil in 64. Now, it doesn't mean it was him, but people claim that they thought it was him. But after Brazil, he's just gone. We don't know what happens to him.
Yeah. I want to back up a little bit, because when you were talking about the blonde woman,
okay,
and just explain that a little bit, because I'm going to ask you a question. I don't know if it's true or not, but just explain that, because I think this is the first time I've heard this. And maybe is it in the book about a blonde woman that was kind of?
I think we originally might have put it in there, and then we had to take it out. But there again, we had so many pages.
No, I know, but that's kind of
having to take some of it out.
And this is an interesting story. That,
yes.
And, Ken will make the connection about this woman and Morris. How it's a little circumstantial, but it does kind of connect to them. But anyway, I'll let Ken continue.
Yeah. So, the first time we hear about this woman is from Fred Breezy. And it's when he's meeting with the England family. They're asking, of course, about, their brothers, John and Clarence. And at some point in time, like I said, one of the sisters on the tape asked about the third man, and Fred said, well, there was another American there with them, another American man, and there was this American woman that was with him, and he on the tape somehow, for some reason, he even talks about how blonde she was. I don't know if she was like true blonde. In fact, I think he even said she was like a true blonde, which I don't know what that means, but maybe she was just very, very blonde. Maybe it wasn't like she had dyed her hair or something. Maybe it was natural. But anyway, he talks about this woman, and the way he describes her as someone who was like either in charge or was part of this group. And so I just remember it in the back of my brain. And then years later, as I'm doing my research, I happened to come across an affidavit that was recorded back in 1976, I believe it was. And the affidavit was there was an undercover FBI agent who was investigating this potential drug ring that was going on in the Tampa area. And they were tapping the phones of several of these people that were in this group. Fred Breezy happened to be one of the individuals that was in this group. And that's the reason why when I was doing the search, this came up, because I was looking for everything related to Fred Breezy. And when I first saw it, I was like, it's interesting. So I started kind of reading it. And it doesn't even really start off with Fred Breezy. It starts off with these other individuals.
Is this thing you sent me, the state of Florida, Pellet, Richard Brainerd, Fred Breezy,
Yes.
Vicky Lyons?
Yes, that's her. So as I'm reading this affidavit, they talk about Vicky Lyons, and they talk about her they really kind of honed in on her a lot, because she supposedly was making this phone call down to Colombia and she was talking to this guy named Carlos. The full name, I don't have it. I'm not looking at it. Actually, I am looking at it.
Yeah.
His full name was Carlos. I'm looking real quick.
I just remembered now that there was a woman when Fred Breezy was talking about the photos to the family, that there was this very blonde woman. Is this the same woman then?
Yes. So whenever and supposedly she was making this phone call down to this individual in Colombia. Well, I actually looked this guy up later on, and he was a pretty well-known drug kingpin in Colombia. And she was making this phone call down to him constantly. And they had recorded how many times she had made this phone call. And so...
Is it Carlos Robinson? Is that it?
That's it, Carlos Robinson. And so they even had her phone number that they had recorded that she was using when she made this phone call. Well, this is the same area that Fred Breezy and all of his cohorts used to fly down to. And that's where they would bring drugs back into Florida. So what you learned about this affidavit is, one, you think about when you hear about Fred Breezy, you almost kind of think about, when you tell the story that he's this individual that had this solo plane and he would fly down into South America, he would bring drugs back and, almost kind of like a small type criminal. But actually, from this affidavit, there were multiple planes. It wasn't just his.
Mm-hmm.
He had multiple planes. And they were bringing back in large quantities of drugs. And so as I was reading and I said, okay, Vicky Lyons, I was like, where have I heard that name at before? I couldn't figure it. Something in my brain was like going, I've heard that name before. And so one day I was going through the FBI files again. Do you know that Frank Morris and John and Clarence always use aliases? We know that John used to use an alias of Jerry for whatever reason. Clarence used to use the name of Carl Miller, who was one of his cousins. And Frank Morris actually used to go by Frank Lyons.
Interesting.
Not Frank Morris. And so when I read that, I was like, wait a minute. Here is Vicky Lyons. Frank Morris used to be called Lyons. And I was like, is there
weird
a possible
coincidence
relationship between these two? I mean, Fred Breezy even says that this woman was blonde. Well, I was able to track down what I believe is Vicki Lyons, and she was blonde. She was a blonde woman. Now, whether or not this individual is the same woman that Fred Breezy is talking about in his interview or his meeting with the England brothers, he never says the woman's name.
Mm-hmm.
Very strange that this lady who was involved with Fred Breezy and this drug running program out of South America has the same last name as the name that Frank Morris used to use as his last name.
Yeah. Did this, I'm just scanning through this affidavit. Was Vicki Lyons, was she ever charged with the crime?
No.
Okay. So then
you go to look her up. You will not find any charges against her, nor do you find any charges against the other men that are listed in here. The only person that was ever charged was Fred Breezy.
Yeah, I saw the news article.
Yep.
Yeah, the one that says, where is it?
But in this affidavit, they not only list her name, but they list her address, her phone number, and who she was actually contacting in Colombia.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether or not anybody's ever done any research on these people.
Why would they, though? Why would they?
Somehow they're related to Fred Breezy and the drug running that was going on in South America. And if that's true, somehow it's related to John and Clarence.
It's interesting. Huh.
It's a crazy connection.
Yeah, it is.
But the fact, it's a lot of, like I said, there's a lot of, you need a lot of string theory here to kind of put this one together. Put them all here.
But that whole picture of there being this very blonde woman down there, I remember that.
Yes. So, to me, I'm not saying that this is the same lady. All I'm saying is this lady is blonde. The lady that was down with Frank Morris in Brazil was blonde, according to Fred Breezy. And she happens to have the same last name as a name that Frank Morris used to use.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is that coincidence?
Yeah.
You tell me.
Now, in this article, saying 600 pounds of marijuana to be destroyed and 6 jailed, it says the people, it was like there was Thomas Kenneth Wagner.
Yep.
There was Fred Breezy.
Yep.
Richard Charles Brainerd. Who else? There's a list of like 200, but her name is Darwin Aldous Sauls.
Maybe she was an informant.
Thomas O'Neill. Jonathan Barley Smith. But yeah, her name's not in this.
This was not a small group. This wasn't a Fred Breezy flying down to Colombia by himself, going to meet some drug person, grabbing a few, pounds of marijuana and flying it back into town. This was a huge organization that was going on.
Right. And of course, why wouldn't he want the England brothers? He trusted them. He knew them.
Yes.
Why wouldn't he have suggested that to Mickey Cohen and say, hey, these guys are good. They'll do it for you. They'll be loyal to you.
Well,
it makes sense.
Yes. And like I said, I did a Google search on that Carlos Robinson, and there really is a person. He's no longer alive, but he does have relatives in Colombia with that same name. His name is listed in Colombia.
Yeah. And he was considered a drug.
He was considered to be a drug lord type kind of person in Colombia. Now, how all of this relates to Frank Morris, because I know we're talking about Frank Morris.
Yeah.
But my connection with this was when I read her last name, and then I read the names that Frank Morris used to use. He used to go by Frank Lyons.
Yeah, I mean, that's not a common, like, why would you pick that name?
That is really crazy that this lady who Fred Breezy said was down there with Frank and was with Frank. She was down there. I mean, he even said she was with Frank or with the third man. He never said Frank Morris.
Now, what do you mean with? Like just standing side by side, or there was like a romantic kind of connection?
He never said. All he said was there was a third individual with a lady that was from America also.
When you first said that, the first thing that came to mind was Candy Barr, but obviously it's not her.
No.
So
No, but I remember the story.
I still believe it's this Vicky Lyons.
I remember this too. And also, like, there was no photo of her.
No.
Right,
Well,
which is interesting.
I brought up the transcript of the Fred Breezy recording he did with the family, and
Definitely read it.
there are several references. It says there was another American woman down there with them that was never introduced to me. Now, it could have been the other man's wife or girlfriend or whatever. I don't know, but maybe I shouldn't say. So that's one point. Somebody says something that you can't hear because there's a lot of crosstalk that happens during the recording. And Fred says he didn't ask. So we don't quite know what that means. Another time, let's see, it says the three of us sitting at the table on the sidewalk, cafe type of deal. We had an interpreter with us, and he had a woman with him. And that's pretty much it. And then he says the picture that I took, well, Jerry took it, and I was standing by the telephone booth talking. Oh, that's John's wife. That's another. It just says I'm talking to a woman. And he says this woman, like I said, she's a blonde.
Blonde.
And then somebody says, of course, and says, no, she's not dyed blonde. She's not a bottle blonde. She's
true blonde.
Yeah. Right.
And then he goes on to say, I would say, about 57. And in 75, she still had this is 1975. She had a good figure. She seemed to me a little bit older than somebody. It's inaudible. That's what I'm guessing on that. And then the last thing he says is, and I think the blonde woman is either the sister or girlfriend, wife or something.
Yeah. So Dolly is related.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And interesting that she's a true blonde. That, I mean, there may be a lot of blonde people down in Brazil, but
he did say that she was an American.
Oh, okay. So that clarifies that.
American woman.
And she was with this third guy.
Interesting. And then you sent me that picture of that woman.
Now, I'm not sure if that is the same woman when I did a search for Vicky Lyons, that's what came up.
Uh-huh.
And she was from Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At least died in Florida. I'm not sure that's the exact same woman.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, though, that, like I said, in the affidavit, which is what I was kind of keying off of, the woman described in here is Vicky Lyons, which is the same name that Frank Morris used as an alias.
Yeah. How old was she? How old was she? Because here in the little bio
she was
here.
only born. The lady that I took the picture of was born in 1950, which, she would have been old enough to have been down in Brazil in 1975.
But she would have been young.
Well, yeah, in 68 she graduated.
Younger than Frank Morris.
Yeah, and she was in 68. She graduated high school, Huntington High School, in Florida.
I don't think that's her.
If that is the same woman, and she is blonde, I mean, you can look at her. She was blonde. If that is the same woman, and look at some of the names that she gave her kids. Did you read some of her kids?
I'm looking at it right now.
She was married to a guy named Clarence, and one of her kids she named John.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, John Douglas.
John Douglas.
I didn't see
and
Clarence.
Her husband's name was Clarence.
Oh, her husband's name Clarence. That's strange.
Now he does describe her. Fred does describe her as being older. So he guesses in 1975 she was 57, which meant she would have been born in 1918. And
right.
That's true.
Way too old for this lady.
Right. And then Frank Morris was born in 26. So she was, what?
Yeah.
12 years older than him?
Yeah, I'm going to say 10.
Yes. I don't know if
No.
the
8 years
Vicky
older.
Lyons,
8 years older.
the Vicky Lyons in this affidavit is the same one that I sent you. But I have tried to find this lady. I even asked one time when I found this article, that's back when I was working with Art, and I asked him, and he said he tried to find her and he could not find her. But how is she in an affidavit that
I know.
FBI recorded, but yet no one knows what happened to her?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, they have information like address information, these affidavits?
Well, we
Usually
had the
somewhere.
address of where she lived. We have her address, and we also have her phone number that she used when she was making a phone call down to Columbia. So
Is that in the FBI
phone
report?
number, and I have her address where she used to live.
Hmm.
Is that in the
Write the
FBI
number now.
report?
Call her up.
What's that?
Is that in the
Call her
FBI
up.
report?
That is in this affidavit report. Yes.
Oh, okay. So I don't have the whole thing. What you
It's
sent me.
listed her address and her phone number.
Mm.
Interesting.
But
Well,
yet, when I told Art about it, he was not able to find her.
Right. She might have been.
So did she leave the country and go to Brazil?
Well, the other thing too,
Or was
is,
she in witness protection?
let's just say for the sake of argument that Vicky Lyons is with Frank Morris, who's known also as Frank Lyons.
Right.
Well, if Frank Lyons is a not a real name, it's not his real name. Well, that's not her real name either.
Nope.
That's just the name that they're going by as a either dating couple or married couple.
Mm-hmm.
So you're looking for somebody who probably has a different name,
Right.
a legal name.
Yeah. Well, undoubtedly the name that she used was whoever was writing this affidavit, and I believe he's listed at the very top, he's the one who does the investigation, and he was able to find her and her address. So her address was listed up under her name, and her phone number was listed up under Vicky Lyons. So she was using that name and had undoubtedly got a phone number and an address using that name. And when she made those calls down to Columbia, to Carlos Robertson, they recorded her calling this individual.
Interesting.
What's interesting, though, is she's not listed as one of the 6 people that were charged.
No.
But she's in the affidavit.
Right. Which is why I was thinking maybe she was an informant, or if she was.
She flipped on them?
She flipped on them.
Either that or maybe she left the country.
Mm-hmm.
They would have found her.
They would have still charged her, though.
Right.
They could have charged her if they found her.
No, I mean, they could say that,
They could still list her.
list her as in the charge and said that she fled the country.
Interesting.
The blonde. It's always the
To
blonde.
me, though, you
Only
have
me.
a connection. You have a connection down to Colombia. You can act. There are actually relatives of this Carlos Robertson still alive. If you do a Google search on him, you will find him in his. I mean, when I did a Google search on him, his family is listed in Colombia.
Oh, maybe they're still in the family business. You never know.
Maybe we ought to reach out to him and see if he'll come on the podcast.
Yeah.
I mean,
You never
it's-
know.
You know,
You
and
never
drugs
know.
is their cash crop down there.
Oh,
Yeah.
this was interesting.
This is a rabbit hole. I didn't think we were going down.
I know, it was a big rabbit hole.
So you would think about if John and Clarence were still doing drugs, growing drugs during that time frame, Colombia would have been an easy path for them to ship it up to. Fred Breezy and them, could easily fly into Colombia, which he did all the time, pick the drugs up, and then fly it back into the U.S.
Yeah.
There was even a time I thought maybe they were not in in Brazil, but maybe in Colombia. And
They might have been for a period.
searched that area all over, and those anthills do not exist in Colombia.
Yeah.
And, even Art said that those photos that Fred Breezy took were in Colombia. They were, in Brazil, not.
Well, also the fact that they had Fred Breezy, who was a pilot who's experiencing flying into South America all the time, that also brings a lot of credence to the sightings. They saw him in the U.S. They could have just, because he smuggled drugs in. Why couldn't he smuggle a person in? It wasn't like they were going through customs. They were landing on these dirt strips in Florida, which you said still exist. And there was, they're flying on back then. It's like it was so much easier to do that.
Well, all I can say is that like Judy Breezy, who is Fred Breezy's last wife, who I've spoken to, she said that Fred brought one of those men to her house in the mid-70s before he went to prison, before he got caught. So it would have been like 75, 74, maybe 74, 75. Brought one of those individuals who we know and has been identified as John to the house, her house. Yeah. And she saw him. And she said she talked to him. She didn't know who he was. He said his name was Jerry, that he was heading north, and she never saw him again. But Fred is the one who brought him to the house.
Yeah. So, incredible. Another incredible circumstantial.
When we get down to Brazil, and we are going to Brazil, one way or the other, whether or not, we have anybody helping us go, I will be going back to Brazil at some point in time. And when we go back down there, we're going to find the answer.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
That's all there is to it.
There you go. All right, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Till next week. All right. Thank you.
Did you know using your browser in incognito mode doesn't actually protect your privacy? Take back your privacy with IPVanish VPN. Just one tap and all your data, passwords, communications, browsing history, and more will be instantly protected. IPVanish makes you virtually invisible online. Use IPVanish on all your devices, anytime you go online at home, and especially on public Wi-Fi. Get IPVanish now for 70% off a yearly plan with this exclusive offer at IPVanish.com/audio.